everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and happy Valentine's Day! Today I am going to dye the 2024, it's still weird to say 2024, Valentine's Day colorway. And I'm going to be dyeing this colorway on multiple different yarn bases using my layering yarn lasagna technique. This is going to allow me to get a variegated colorway with good coverage, but will also allow me to process a lot of yarn at the same time. And I'll talk more about all of this as we get going. Our first batch is going to have 800 grams of yarn in one pan. At least that's the goal. And each layer of yarn will be a different yarn base. We have Wool to Die For's multicolored neps. This yarn is 85% superwash merino wool, 15% Donegal nep. And the neps are a pink, a green, a blue, and a yellow. Slightly reminiscent, even if they're a little more saturated, to those conversation hearts, which I think is fun. We've got Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn, 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And then we have Swish DK and Twill is worsted, and both of these are 100% superwash merino wool. If you want to learn more about any of these yarn bases, I do have links and affiliate links down in the video description. And I might earn a commission if you make a purchase through one of my affiliate links. One thing I do want to add about Twill, the yardage is low. There's only about 150 yards per 100 grams, but that is enough to make an adult or kid hat, which surprised me because I always thought I needed closer to 220 yards, but I think the yarn is dense enough that it makes a really wonderful hat. But now I am going to go pre-soak this yarn off camera in just some plain tap water with no acid. I want no additional acid in the yarn until after I've applied the dye. I knew that I wanted to create a colorway that was primarily red with a pop of pink, but how much contrast between the red and the pink, that's what I was really unsure about. So I decided to put on my respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves and quickly swatch 3 different pinks and 2 reds onto my yarn mop here. So that way I could just get a feel of the color temperature before picking the final 2 colors. I am so glad that I went ahead and did this because I know now that the colors I want to use are Ponsettia and Berry Crush. Berry Crush is a little bit more of a purpley pink, but it looks so good with Ponsettia, which does have some blue in it, but is a lot brighter than the Cherry Bomb. The Cherry Bomb is feeling a little more muted. I forget if Cherry Bomb brightens when you apply heat. I don't remember, but the amethyst is too close, and for all I love fluorescent fuchsia, I want to use something a little bit less neon today. So these colors are going away, and we have our stars, which right here, looking at it, I might not feel the colors together, but when you see those swatches, then I see it together, and I love it. The yarn mop that I sort of swatched those colors on is right off camera, and I will use it as needed. And I think I'm gonna lay things out like this today. This is one of our skeins of Stroll, or 2 of our skeins of Stroll. And I'm starting with this because it has a lot more strands, and so I think that as things go on it might be a little bit easier or a little bit more challenging to lay out, even though I've used this with this technique all the time. Now the first layer I start with a lot less water because I want to be able to flip it. So I'm adding just a little bit because what I'm hoping for is I added enough water that you can see I can squish it. But also when I lift it, maybe it would drip if I lift the whole thing, but when I lift it, there's not a lot of liquid left in the bottom for colors to sort of spread together like a river. And now I'm going to go put my mask back on so we can start dyeing. Okay, let's start with our Berry Crush. And I'm going to speckle it out. It's going to be a large-ish section of this color, and the color will be mostly red, but depending on how things are knit, we could, I don't know if we'd end up with micro striping per se, but you could end up with some cool spirals and things like that. And don't forget, We still have no acid in here. Okay, and now I'm going to start working this color through, which I feel like Berry Crush is a color that could get quite intense if you want to, and so the amount of dye, I have a feeling we will have a lot of variation in this color from batch to batch. But I can't remember how quickly it tends to strike. I will say I'm happy that when I push in right now, I am seeing a lot of that color. And okay, there are a couple of white spots down here, and we might see some breaking. There's definitely like a blue patch. But overall, we're getting good coverage. Now, the problem with using the yarn mop that I had used for swatching is that it already has a reasonable amount of dye on it as far as the mop goes. So I may need to add acid to it and give it like a intermediate heat set. All right, but now we're going to add our poinsettia, which is one of my favorite reds. I've never looked to see what exactly is in it. So Dharma's, like if something's a blend of pigments, it'll often say blend. If it's a single pigment, it might say the pigment. So I'm sure that there's like a material, MDS, like a material something in safety, where you could find the actual ingredients and chemicals. Certainly not proportions, but one thing I always do, I always pop the lid back on when I'm closing a container. And you'll notice that I'm leaving a little bit of section of white. That is not going to remain there in the end. I will say this color is dealing with red is a little bit creepy with what it's doing on the gloves. But I want to give myself space to combine and work these colors into each other without causing any kind of blending. And around the zip tie, I'm going to want to be extra careful to make sure I get good coverage of our red. But you can see that there are some areas that are going to be deeper, some that are a little bit lighter. But the good news, as I bring this down, just for this first layer, and press it through, the good news is that these colors are spreading enough and aren't striking too quickly. And so that makes me happy. And now I'm going to very carefully, so we'll be more vigorous later on, but I'm very carefully going to blend that there. And now I'm going to want to very carefully try to flip things. But I'm going to go rinse off my hands in some water first. And this is so I can try to flip without, there we go, without adding any red onto our pink. And you can see that we have some blue patches in here. Some blue patches in our pink because that color is breaking a bit. And I'm just trying to spread things out. We will add more water in a little bit, but we'll also add more dye as well. But this time, before we add dye, I'm going to go rinse off my gloves. And I'm drying them off with a paper towel so that way I don't introduce moisture into our dye containers. And now I'm quickly going to apply that Berry Crush and Poinsettia and work it through just like I had done with our initial layer. Okay, and now before we add our next layer, one thing I like to do is add a little bit of dye on top. And so then after we add the next yarn in, we'll be working this color through the yarn that we're adding on top of this layer, but then also through this bottom layer as well. I feel like there's a layer that gets an advantage. The bottom layer gets the most movement, it gets the most motion and the most squishing of all the colors. But before I started doing the flip on this bottom layer that I now do, before I started doing that, it used to just get the dye on the one side, whereas even if I did not layer dye on here like I'm doing, Even without this dye right now, we would have dye that is sort of sponged in here that would go up into the next layer. But this just makes it a little easier because I don't like to flip the subsequent layers as much as I do the first one. Now again, I do want to add more water, but I'm going to wait until we add our yarn. Okay, and I'm bringing over some of our multi-nep yarn, sort of layering it. This yarn, which all this section down here is red, so this isn't a problem to have it spread out down there. I just want to make sure that we get enough on that pink area as well. Spreading it out and trying to spread out the yarn that's going to come here in our red area. I feel like the skeins from Wool to Dye For are a lot longer than some of the skeins from Knit Picks. Okay, and now I'm going to start squishing. And you can see that we already have great color coverage. We will be adding dye on top plus liquid. But there's no harm in quickly getting started. And I feel okay with some of the pinks going into the red. I just don't want as much of the reds going backwards into our pinks, if that's going to make sense. Now, we likely have white patches here in our multi-nep yarn, but maybe not that many white patches. Oh, this yarn is so fun. I'm really curious to see how the pinks may or may not pop on that red area. Okay, let's add some liquid here. Okay, I added maybe 2 to 3 cups of water. And you can see how much easier it is for me to press now. And as I am pressing, I'm trying to work my way through all of the yarn so that way we can try to get some good coverage. That dye we have sandwiched, we want that nice and dissolved. We may, after we start adding dye on here, add more liquid, but we'll also see. More color is coming. This yarn mop has so much color on it, and there's not a lot of surface area for me to continue wiping my hands. So I just added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. And you can see the spread of color because we had all those pinks and all of those reds in here. I'm going to gently squeeze it again, sort of working those colors through. And whether or not I call this yarn mop done or we continue to add color to it, that I don't know. But I am going to go and quickly steam set this off camera for at least 10 minutes, just so that way I can touch it and actually wipe the dye off of my gloves onto it. I think I also discovered that this pan might have a hole in it because there was a little bit of liquid down below. At the end of this project, I guess I will wash and recycle it. But I love these aluminum pans because they don't melt if you add super hot yarn into them. And I am able to use them over multiple projects before they eventually get damaged. And as we carry on with this next layer, I do have a new yarn mop that has no acid in it, just off camera. And so I'm doing a light layer of the Berry Crush. Now, a lot of yarn mops would involve me wiping the dry powder directly off of my gloves onto the mop. Today, for at least this first stage, I'm working it in and we're going to be wiping the liquid dyes that I have on my gloves off. But when we get ready for the next layer and we put dye powder on top, then I will have dye on my gloves that I have to wipe onto the mop. But the new mop does not currently have acid in it. So anyway, I am going to carry on. Another important thing to note as I am working these dyes through the layers is that it might look like, oh, the color sinks in super fast, but the more you work the colors through, the more you're likely to get more coverage of it throughout the skein. Because there could be some resist, some yarn could be on top of itself, especially with a long skein like this one. And then if it's doing that, then you might not get the same kind of coverage throughout it, but that'll give pretty tonal variation. It's just one perk of this technique is that as I'm pressing the colors in on this layer, I'm also continuing to work colors through on the layer below. And so I continued to work the color through, add some dye powder on top, layer on the next yarn base, which would be either Swish DK or Twill, and then continue creating this dye yarn layered pan or a lasagna. The other thing is that as I added each new layer, I did add a little bit more water. Sometimes before adding the next yarn, sometimes a little after. Having that water there is important to help the dyes dissolve, but also to help work them through our yarn. But you don't want so much water added that the dyes will run together. So it's a balance. I always try to have the water level be a little bit beneath the surface of the yarn and just slowly add it, keeping an eye on things. Okay, I want to add another, I guess approximately a cup of water. Before even adding the acid, I'm not going to work that through yet. We'll be working it through once I start applying the vinegar. We're gonna add a lot of vinegar. 1, 2, I would say total, we've got maybe 9 or 10 cups of water in here so far, not counting the water that we brought in with the yarn itself. Because I squeezed a lot of it out, but not all of it. Okay, that's 5, 6, 7, let's do 8. Why not? Because we now want these colors to start striking. And so this time as I'm working the liquid through, I'm trying to mix in our acid. And I'm just going to go down the field. And it's, you know, I wonder how easy it is to like mix it up. Like if I press and then release, like that water definitely goes, but I'm curious. It would be fun if like you could see the vinegar move, but I mean you can't. I do want to be careful with when I push from that end. I don't want to push. You can see all these reds we still have here, although it is getting less intense. It no longer looks frightening when I press down, which is a very good sign now. Okay, let me rinse this off. Ooh, and here also, I'm observing things starting to clear. I wonder if the pink is a little bit closer to a purple than what I was originally intending. And color value-wise, they're very similar. Like there's not a huge amount of contrast, but I'm also okay with that, I think. So I'm now gonna let this sit for about 30 minutes just to settle, let some of these colors slowly start binding without heat before we add even more water to it and bring it to the stove. Or actually, we'd probably do the reverse order. Bring it to the stove, then add more water over there to minimize gravity moving the colors around. These colors are feeling so juicy and ooh, that's a good sign. Okay, wait, I am seeing some more red in here, but areas are clear. And I am seeing some pink, but areas are clear. Woohoo! Okay, I'm gonna pop gloves on, carry this to the stove, and we'll add some water and yeah. Okay, I have another 2 cups of water right here. Just gonna pour that on. But now you notice, and I need my gloves, I don't know if you can see how the water just sort of like went down. That's why I typically add the water to the lightest end and move it to the deepest versus going the other way around. But I'm not that concerned. What I do want to do sort of shimmy things, get those edges, because if there's dye sometimes trapped along the edge. See, I do see some reds still, especially if I move the yarn. And but we also have not applied any heat yet. So I think what we're gonna do, clean off my gloves, turn on the heat. I'm having the heat on high right now just until I start seeing steam. And then I will probably add a little bit more water and reduce the heat to low. Ooh, that color is looking quite deep. That's pretty. And as for our yarn mops, we have two from this batch. The one from our first round and then the one from our second round that has less color. What I'm gonna do here is squeeze it, and the good news is, look how clear that water looks. That is a good sign. All right, I'm gonna go steam set this for 30 minutes, then we'll go ahead and wash it off camera. I think we can get away with one yarn mop per batch, and without necessarily heat setting it in the middle, because there'll be a lot less dye on it already from the beginning. Okay, things are getting warm. I'm reducing the heat to low for now, and I'm gonna bring over more water. Oh dear. Please, please no scorching. Oh, I would be so sad. Okay, I'm gonna turn off the heat. All right, we found the source of the burning smell, and it was definitely not the yarn, which makes me feel a lot better. However, we're gonna continue and add this more water, which I was starting to say. Had 4 cups of water and 1 or 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. I don't remember anymore because we got nice and distracted. But now all of our yarn is a little bit floaty. This can let some of those dyes move a little bit if needed, but most of the dye is in our yarn. I mean, there's definitely still some color there, but again, we have not really heated anything yet. So I have the heat on medium to medium low, and I'm feeling a lot more nervous because there was like a little crumb on top of the burner, and that freaked me out. I'm going to cover everything with some tin foil in a moment to help trap the heat and keep our water level a little more consistent in here. Now, I think I'm going to heat it on low for 45 minutes or so to give things time to heat up. And this is still faster, especially if I want to let the yarn cool off in the pan, than if I was going to do 4 separate pans and heat them individually, because I only have 2 of these pans. So in theory, when I do the next batch, I can do 16 skeins, 1 pan, 2 pan, 16 skeins, and have that all going all at once. And yeah, that's just more that I can process and heat at once. If you had a steam cupboard with multiple pans, you don't need this kind of technique. You can have multiple different pans that you can heat all at once. But for a small batch dyer, I'm now dyeing 4 batches really in 1 pan. But anyway, I'm just gonna lay this foil on top like so. Some steam will still get out, so I don't think I made the foil long enough, but it'll keep a lot of it trapped, and it'll trap some of that heat in there as well. So I'll see you in about 45 minutes. It's been 45 minutes. Oh, funny, because this was touching the acid, the aluminum reacted a little bit. That's one of the reasons why the pans sort of degrade over time. Oh, that's looking so clear. Oh, thank goodness. There's a hint of some pink back there, but it's not bad. I do see some blue pops, but almost all of the colors in the yarn. I'm gonna let the yarn cool off in the pan for, I don't know, a couple hours maybe, but oh, this is great. Oh, I was starting to say one reason why those aluminum pans degrade is that the acid sort of dissolves the aluminum over time. And so, yeah, that's just something that happens. Plus, they're flimsy. But anyway, the heat's off. We're going to let it cool, and then we'll come back. All right, it's been a couple of hours, and my hands are stained from another project. Things are slightly warm, but I'm going to start removing it to reveal the layers. And We do have some hints of blue, I think, where our Berry Crush likely has broken. Oh, I'm seeing a nap. Oh, that's exciting. I was like, ooh, that's a big blob. Then I realized that's one of the Donegal naps. Ooh. You know, I was unsure how I was gonna feel, but I think it's so pretty and soft for like vibrant color. But I don't know, I'm curious to hear what you think. If you were in my position, would you have gone for a more electric pink or not? Now, because of the Donegal content here, this colorway is going to feel less bright and more muted just because there's some fibers in there that can't be dyed. I'm the most excited to see this one dry. But I'm excited to see all of them. Ugh, the Stroll looks so vibrant. Oh, I absolutely love it. All right, things are mostly cool. I'll let it cool for a little longer and then we can wash it. In the yarn mops I washed off camera, there was no bleeding, so I was optimistic when I went to go wash 400 grams of our colorway in just some cool tap water. In the winter, I add a little bit of warm water to it, so that way it's not too cold on my fingers. And we washed it with dish soap. And thankfully, there was no bleeding. So I went ahead and did one more rinse. Then I put all the yarn through my spin dryer to spin out a lot of the liquid so it dries a little faster. Hung up the yarn to dry, and then washed the other 4 skeins off camera. Here is all of the yarn we dyed from our prototype round. And I would say we have a lot of consistency across the yarn bases, where we have Stroll, Swish DK, the Twill, and then our multi-nep yarn. One big difference is you can see a more blue spot down there. I think that some of the blues that break from the Berry Crush are just a little bit more concentrated over here. The hues in our multi-nep yarn are just slightly less vibrant, slightly more muted than the others, but I think it's that 15% Donegal nep content that is throughout the entire yarn, and I believe it's likely an acrylic or something that doesn't pick up dye, and so that will sort of mute things overall. I'm trying to look here and see if I feel like I see the pink neps, and I feel like those kind of disappear in the red. I'm not seeing them very clearly. I don't know if my finger's on screen right now. Like, I think right there is one, but the other colors are vibrant. And I never really expected the pink to show up here, but it's so fun to have a tweed yarn with all of these other colors in it. Yeah, I really enjoy that. It's very confetti, very happy. Before I go and start twisting this, I want to show our 2 Stroll yarn mops from that first round and our 2 Swish DK yarn mops from the second and third rounds that were done off camera. All of these yarn mops are more wild, more variegated. I mean, yeah, I guess even more variegated than our variegated colorway that we made with the lasagna. But I think any one of these would coordinate really well with our more regular repeating main colorway. And then the final thing I want to do is bring over 2 of our Superwash MCN skeins from another batch. I guess this particular batch, my red, is a lot more patchy, and I don't think these 2, they were in the same pan, but I don't think they're the same layer. And you can see that the pink is shorter than one than on the other. They're likely different layers. I think how even the colors get down here depends on how much I'm pushing that color through, and so there can be some variation there, but overall I would say the colors are maybe slightly more muted, but that could be attributed to it being a different pan, not just a different yarn base. Although, if I bring over one of the skeins of Twill, this does look very similar to the first batch, and the color is a little more even in there. But I'll have to play around with this yarn lasagna using different types of fibers in the same pan, just to see if we see more differences, like we might if we were to kettle dye a Superwash MCN with a Superwash Merino yarn. But anyway, let's go twist up the yarn. And here we have all the yarn that I dyed. And I think things look remarkably similar, with the exception of our multi-nep yarn. But overall, we've got the same colorway on 5 different yarn bases. 5 different yarn bases. And it's always exciting when I can do something like that. One of my favorite parts about Valentine's Day is making Valentines. And this year's is so cute. I went for something akin to like an arrow through a heart by using a yarn needle, using some single ply yarn, and then each of the Valentines is signed on the back by me. These Valentines, and there's a few other extras I'll show in a second, are for people who pre-ordered the 2024 Mystery Valentine's Day yarn, which came wrapped with a Valentine and a holographic heart sheep sticker that actually I designed based on or exactly following the card that I made last year for Valentine's Day, and a heart-themed progress keeper. And the charm on these progress keepers that have little lobster claws will vary depending on how many more skeins of yarn I end up dyeing for the pre-order. But anyway, I like to put this together as a sort of treat yourself kind of thing so everyone can feel some yarny, squishy love for Valentine's Day. If you're concerned that you missed your chance to pre-order this yarn because today is Valentine's Day, there may still be some mystery bundles left in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. And even if there's not, there is an ability to order some of this yarn. I will have some skeins of this colorway available as either ready to ship or dyed to order, depending on, again, how much more I dye between now and when the video airs. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I typically post on Tuesday and Friday mornings, but then sometimes we have special series or videos and things throughout the week. So if your notifications are on, then you won't miss a new video. Plus, this is by far the biggest way you can help support the content here. I hope that you're all having a wonderful Valentine's Day. Here's a virtual hug from me to you. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching. That is a good sign, but this video is sponsored by a broken zip tie.